Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Integrating FSSC 22000 with ISO 9001, 14001, and 45001. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You may have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to join over the telephone, please use the dial-in information that you will see displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to the presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will address them at the end. Now, I would like to go ahead and welcome today's panelists. We have Ronisha Benton, Corporate Food Safety and Systems Manager at Coca-Cola Bottling Company United. We have Jacqueline Southey, North American Representative at FSSC 22000, and Remco Peters, Technical Manager Food North Europe, Senior Lead Assessor at LRQA. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for participating. Let's talk a little bit about LRQA before we get started. LRQA is one of the world's leading providers of food safety and assurance solutions. By combining strong values, decades of experience in risk management and mitigation, and a focus on the future, LRQA supports clients as they build safer, more secure, and sustainable businesses. So with that, let's take a look at our first topic today that we'd like to discuss. And what is the true definition of an integrated management system and the theory behind it? So Jacqueline, would you mind taking this first one?
Yes, good morning. And hello, everybody. Hi, Ronisha. Hi, Remco. Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here today to talk about this subject. So when we started talking about this, I wanted to actually go back and actually see what the definition of an integrated management system was, and to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, because I think some people think about it in different ways. So the definition that I found was the integration of a management system refers to the activity of combining several implemented system elements and activating the interfaces to form an interoperative process that satisfies all the system requirements. So now that we know what that is, we can talk about how to achieve it. So effectively, to cut through all the jargon, how I see an integrated management system is to use the management system approach that is actually defined by ISO, the International Standards Organization, which are the standards that we're going to talk about today. So certainly the integration of these management systems has certainly been the motive behind ISO as it's moving towards a more uniform approach with all its management systems. And the central objective is to develop a uniform structure among all its standards, to allow businesses to just optimize their efficiency, their productivity, their effectiveness, and all-round uniformity in this risk-based sort of safety format. So where does FSSC stand in all of this? So we talk about FSSC as a management system. And FSSC is a management system because it's based on ISO 22000. It's also obviously a GFSI benchmarked certification program, but because it's based on ISO 22000, it also has all the advantages bestowed upon it by being related to the ISO family of management system standards. And the reason that we have this alignment or this opportunity to integrate all the management systems is because we're moving towards this high-level structure, the role of Annex SL, which provides this common framework for all the ISO standards, which I'll talk about in more detail a little bit later on. So the idea behind the standardization of the high-level structure is to ensure that all the new standards adhere to this common system and this common principle. And as they're all being revised, they all align to this same format. So maybe if we could have the next slide, please. Let's just talk about how these benefits, how this management system approach actually benefits FSSC 22000. So for those of you that are familiar with FSSC 22000, you'll know how FSSC uses that ISO 22000 approach. So ISO 22000 provides that framework. It provides the common management system framework. And this defines, not only does it define the process to control the food safety hazards, minimize risks, and sort of establish this behavior-based culture that we talk about, it's also on the same HLS format as the other management systems. So the ISO 22000 framework does define HACCP. It defines the need for a risk-based hazard assessment in its HACCP program, the development and documentation of the food safety plan for everybody who's familiar with FSSC 22000 is familiar with, the validation, of course, and verification of controls, internal audits and review, which are all in, the food safety plan. But it also, on top of that, defines the requirements for the management system. It defines the management system, it requires requirements for management commitment, defines the requirements for leadership to ensure competence and worker engagement, internal and external communication, and this need to continuously improve the system. In support of that, in order to maintain our GFSI benchmarking status, FSSC also has defined the prerequisite programs, which allows FSSC to cover the whole of the supply chain, and also the FSSC 22000 additional requirements, which add those specific requirements to ensure consistency, integrity, and to provide governance. But essentially, the basis of FSSC 22000 is this ISO 22000 management system framework. So if I could just have the next slide, please. I'll just explain what the HLS system is. And the same HLS system is applied across the board to all the ISO management systems. We're going to focus today on 9001, which is a quality management system, 45001, which is occupational health and safety, and 14001 for environmental management. Now, many of you may already be familiar with 9001 and know the structure of 9001, or maybe you're familiar with 45001 and this framework is familiar to you. But of course, this is the HLS framework, which is familiar to those that are using ISO 22000 also. So this common theme runs through all of the management systems and allows us to integrate them actually in the business. So the management system is that process, that system of processes that is defined to optimize a business process. So when 14001 provides organization with guidance to mitigate environmental risks, or 45000 provides this framework to mitigate worker safety, to mitigate risks to protect the workforce. 9001 defines those requirements for protecting the quality of the product. And all of these are within the same framework. So while the scope and maybe the normative, the first three clauses may be specific to that particular scope, all of the requirements to define the context of the organization, the risks and opportunities are the same, whether you're running 9001, 22001 in FSSC, 22000 in FSSC, 22000, 14001. You have to go through the same processes. Leadership, the commitment to leadership, training, competence of the organization, and the development of safety-based culture is the same across all the standards, same with planning and support. So immediately you get these opportunities for providing this framework for this interoperation that we talked about in the integration of the management system. With FSSC 22000, we also have the HACCP assessment and the food safety management in operation, and operation is going to be different across all the standards. That's going to be where you're looking at worker safety, that's where you're going to look at environmental management. But the performance evaluation and the improvement is that same process of revisiting of internal audits that we're very familiar with in FSSC 22000, but the same processes can be applied in the other standards. So this common framework immediately provides this basis for the integration of the management systems. So this is the theory behind the integration of management systems, and these are the principles on which we base this way forward. And FSSC 22000, with its framework of ISO 22000, is in this great situation to be able to provide a food safety management system that can integrate with the other management systems that a company will have in process. So I think that provides a little bit of a background of the theory, what we hope to promote in the integration of management systems. And I think I'll hand it over to Renisha, who will explain to us how she operates all of these in theory. So Renisha, does that make sense? Is that really how it works in practice?
That's really how it works in practice. And I would say good morning. And just to further elaborate on what Jacqueline just discussed, I would say, especially now with the recent addition of the FSSC and multiple other ISO standards all being aligned, using that Annex SL integrated management system works extremely well in the real world, and it has tons of benefits for your management system, for your compliance status, and your overall business performance. My company, Coca-Cola United, we started off with 9001 and then went to FSSC, and we integrated those two first, actually. And then as 45,001 and 14,001 came into our system, and then with the addition of the Annex SL, we found it easy just to kind of integrate all of those four systems together and have seen it as a wonderful benefit to our management system. A few of the primary benefits that comes to mind when I think about an integrated management system is that it helps to streamline your processes, because you're typically able to use the same or very similar methodologies, tools, documentations, activities, objectives in a manner that takes the massive amount of information that's captured across all four standards, and you're able to combine them together to make them easier to consume, make them easier to understand, and make them easier to be applied by not just management, but also the frontline employees who are doing the work each and every day. This in turn leads to an increased effectiveness and sustainability of your system, not just in theory, but also in practice as well. Another benefit of the IMS is that it reduces duplication and redundancies within the system, which can result in you having significant savings in both money, time, as well as resources for your company. Another benefit is that having an IMS increases the efficiency and the performance of your external audits that you have to maintain your certifications. Because typically, if you have an integrated system, you are able to sometimes have one external audit that can cover multiple standards at the same time. And if you have a decrease in the number of audits, that leads to lower certification costs, which is always a good thing. But it also internally can help you reduce the amount of resources and time that you have to pull away from the business to conduct all of those external audits, which is another added benefit for the company. And last but not least, one of the most important benefits in my mind is that having an integrated management system actually helps you to have a high functioning continuous improvement process that can go across the whole company, because when your system is integrated, it's being managed as a whole and it's being incorporated into your business, which is one of the great things with the context of organization. When you incorporate all those things together, management is able to have a consistent high-level overlook of what the management system and what the business is doing as far as activities, results, and risks. And then that allows management to better be able to use risk to actually prioritize and focus where resources, where improvements, and where to best apply that attention so that you can continually improve, but you can also make sure that the system is working as intended at the same time. Those are a few of the benefits, I would say, but then you get to talking about a few of the challenges, because in my opinion, the benefits definitely outweigh the challenges, but there are some challenges when you start thinking about developing an integrated management system. A few of the challenges that I would like to highlight is one, that it definitely will take some time to build and structure your integrated management system. You're going to have to have some real support, some effort, some time, some resources into building it, because not only do you have to focus on building an IMS that complies with all of the multiple standards, especially the 4 that we're discussing, but you also have to take the time to build an IMS that also realistically fits the needs and expectations of your specific company. You know, that takes some time to actually build. And honestly, it may even take you having to acquire some outside help with a knowledgeable consultant, which may also have some costs, which could be a challenge. But to me, the cost is well worth it, because once you're able to get that structure built and set that foundation for your integrated management system, you'll find that it will start to merge and continue to integrate itself, even as updates are made, as requirements change, or if you want to add new certifications to that actual process. Another challenge that I will highlight is that you have to be prepared to understand that you may have to do a little bit of unnecessary, well, it could be seen as unnecessary work for some of the standards that may not be actually required. I say that because when you're doing an integrated management system, you may have to do some things for one standard that may not be required, but is required for another standard, just for the greater good of the whole system and for consistency purposes. It's typically not a lot. You have to be careful where you pick and choose where you do that at. But if you carefully choose that and you find the right spaces to do that, it will eventually pay off for you in the long run, because it will save you time of trying to handle standards on their own when you can just handle them all together. The last challenge that I would highlight, especially since we're primarily talking about integrating FSSC with the other standards, is that although FSSC can definitely be integrated with the other standards, and I highly encourage it, you have to keep in mind that FSSC still has a lot of different requirements that the other standards do not, as far as having to have on-site audits, as well as have to have its own audit report. Sometimes FSSC audits are also unannounced. This can sometimes bring about challenges with regards to scheduling integrated audits, because the whole purpose of an integrated system is that you want to show the system together integrated. However, sometimes with FSSC, taking into account those things I said, you have to schedule those audits separately, just because that's just the way that it works. However, once again, I think that challenge of scheduling, the benefits that you get internally just far outweigh that, but you have to keep in mind that it can be a challenge for scheduling FSSC with your other integrated audits in some cases.
Right, well, I think that's good to hear. And I think that actually integrating the management system, you know, on a day-to-day basis within your company is sort of one thing, and then operating an integrated audit is another thing. So
Right.
while you're realizing all the benefits, you know, the reduced resources, maybe reduced, you know, waste of time, and, you know, sort of working together actually in the management system and every day, it may not always translate to having a completely integrated audit where you audit all of the systems all in one go. So I can certainly sort of understand that. So I think that's a good opportunity to bring in Remco, who's our expert auditor, to actually talk about, you know, what happens with the audit, and is there such a thing as a fully integrated audit? Is there a difference between an integrated management system, an integrated audit, a blended audit, and so on? So Remco, so what we're going to bring you in now.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jacqueline and Renisa, for giving the explanation, first of all, from the standard itself, and then, of course, from a practical point of view, which is at least as important. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what indeed Jacqueline is pointing out, yeah, how can we manage the audits in this aspect? And I think we first need to make some separation into this as well. First of all, as pointed out, of course, as name of the standard itself, it's 4 different standards. So if you look at ISO 9001, it's quality management related, ISO 22000 is food safety related, ISO 14001 is environmental related, and 45001 is occupational health and human safety related. Looking at that part, as Renisha is indeed indicating, any standard by itself, you already can have some integration by itself. Only even small parts, thinking about the management review, thinking about all kinds of context analysis, which are there, what is important for the organization, you already can have your benefits on it. The trigger into the differences between the major standards here, if you talk about food safety, environment, or occupational health, is about the risk assessment. And here we see some differences from standard to standard. First of all, of course, for the harmonized structure, you see in place clause 4 and clause 6, looking at the environment of the organization. And based on that part, you will have looking at risk and opportunities based on the specific topic. For all those standards, it's more or less the same, emphasizing on the real standard itself. If you look then at ISO 22000, beside clause 6, in which you have the risk and opportunities on strategical level, you will have more the approach on food safety level. And all companies who are certified for ISO 20000 or FSSC 20000 knows that in clause 8, there is the real work which you need to do, as I almost to say food safety manager, looking at the different risks which are there, going to significant risk, and then get in place your control measures. If you look at ISO 14001 and 45001, yeah, there's also talking about a risk assessment, but it's not referring to clause 8 by itself, but it's more related to clause 6. And here we see some kind of difference in place. For 14001, by example, it's not really predefined documented information of how the risk assessment shall be done. So it's not a shall. It can be based on qualitative aspects or quantitative aspects. If you compare that with ISO 22000 or at 45001, yeah, that's more strict in it, that it shall be documented, a framework must be defined, and you need to look at what are the significant risks, and then starting, of course, with your control measures, having that in place. So looking at the risk assessment, yeah, there are some differences in place. Although, and I refer that to what Renisha was saying, each company will benefit from a risk assessment already done for one of the schemes if you want to expand it to the other one. The idea of doing a risk assessment, the idea for looking which are the significant risks, which do you want to treat at first, is the same for all those standards in place. Then coming up to the audits itself. So what we already see is that, yeah, the devil is in the detail. If you talk about that part, still the standards does have a different focus. That is logical. So it's also depending on how the organization has made an integrated system by itself. Is there one manual? Is there one big document? Is there one big risk assessment? Or is it, by example, separated into different subjects by itself? So one separately for food, one separately for environment, one separately for occupational health. The second one, which is important looking at audit, how is the organization by itself structured? Is there one person who can do all, or is the big organization, probably as the situation by Coca-Cola, looking at, yeah, we do have experts in place, and those experts have their own field, their own expertise over there. And yeah, when you're looking at audits, these persons will not sit there for 3 days having only 1 hour to be reel the questions, but yeah, then it will be more separately on that part as well. It's not only about the auditee, so the company itself, it's also related to the auditors. Of course, we want to send an expert, and auditors cannot do all audits by themselves, all equally the same. No, these are experts on a certain level of where they can be, what they can do. So the basic element of having an integrated audit is also not looking at the organization itself, but also looking at the structure, how it is organized in comparison with what the auditor can do, and also what the person cannot do, and for which an expert must be in place or a second audit. Altogether, what also must be taken into consideration, of course, is the length of the audit itself. If you go for a company big size, by example, very complex, everything is there in place, and yeah, for each audit time is needed and you come up that there will be an audit for 10 days, by example, then I think some companies will say, that's a little bit too much. Let's split it up in different time frames by itself. But of course, that's up to the organization. There is no good or no bad in that part at all. Last part I want to explain is, we are now talking about an integrated audit as if everything is the ideal situation. There is one management system in place and every auditor can do everything and all auditees have experience in all kinds of things. Of course, that's not always the case. Besides the integrated audit in which during the interviews you can touch all subjects, it is also possible, of course, to have a combined audit in which you say, well, let's combine everything what is possible. By example, looking at together at the management review for the standards which are integrated all together. But for example, if you are talking to an expert, then to make a separation in one auditor is going to interview one expert, the other interviewer is interviewing the other expert. That is possible as well. Last part is also looking at make it one audit, but more do it together. You have a combined audit days, but the subjects are really different in it. Also here, there is not a good, not a bad. It's looking together with the organization, what is possible, what can be integrated, what can be more time efficient, and what things must be separate for the reasons which I already have explained.
All right, well, I think that's I do actually have a couple of questions. I think that's very interesting. And I think I have some questions for both of you. So just going back to the HLS structure, I identified some common clauses. Clause 4, the context of the organization, sort of clause 7, leadership. We talked about clause 6, risk and opportunities. So if you're running an integrated management system, so like Renisha is running a very good exemplary management system, if you were to go in to audit them, would you just have to audit clause 4 once, clause 5 once, clause 6 once, or do you have to audit them for 45,001 and 22,001 and 15 and 45,001? So is the audit for the clause 4, the context, the same across all standards in, for Renisha, or is that going to be different with the different standards?
I would say when we get audited, and we actually just had an audit last week, we had an audit for 9,001, 45,001, and 14,001 together, an integrated audit. And when they audited the context of organization, because we built our context of organization to be an integrated context of organization, where when you look at that documentation that we have for that, it has all 4 standards on there for the stakeholders, for relevant issues, all of that together is for all 4 standards. So they are able to look at it collectively. They may pick and choose a couple different examples for each standard to make sure that you have truly integrated all standards in that documentation. But if you structure it the right way, it can all be audited at one time. That's what we've seen.
So Remco, do you find that too, that the context of the organization remains the same across all those standards? They have to consider the same things?
Yeah, I think that the good element from the harmonized structure here is that the framework is the same for all those management systems. So the good thing is that if you have indeed the interview with senior management and you can talk about what is happening with the environment, what is happening with the stakeholders, what are the important aspects, what are the risks or opportunities. It's just a matter of thinking first place on food safety, by example, but secondly, think about quality management for the other 2 standards as well. So based on that part, you really can see that part can really be integrated during the audit. If you look a little bit further on it, then you may make a little separation between, on one hand, ISO 20000 and ISO 9001. If you're really looking at those standards, these are looking at process. So you start, for example, by intake of raw materials up to finished goods which are stored. And you can follow the processes, the primary process followed by the secondary processes by example. If you're looking on the same perspective to 14,001 or 45,000, of course, within food, you also have the processes in place. But if then you talk about environmental and think about legislation, think about compliance to legislation, yeah, then it's more a subject by itself for which it can cross over to different departments, to different processes. So the approach will be a little bit different as it is for ISO 20000 or for 9001.
Yeah, I would add before we move on, I think that's a good call out that you just made, Remco, because when you are structuring and if you are going to integrate something like the context of org, you do have to make sure, like I said, that you are including the concept and the purpose of all the standards into that documentation. And when you're building it, make sure you have the right people helping you that understand the requirements for all 4 standards, or that actually work in the practices and the activities within those standards.
That actually brings up another point that I'm interested in. So you talk about, different expertise within your company. You have environmental specialists, you have occupational health specialists that are all leading their teams. When you're integrating a management system, how does that work? Do they all come together, or do you have one person that oversees the whole of an integrated management system? I can actually see that people will learn. I think that the integration is great for combining expertise, and how from a risk assessment point of view, food safety manager can maybe teach a environmental health manager risk assessment, or vice versa. So how does that work in practice, bringing these leaders or experts in their field together so that they're having one management system? Does that make sense? Do you see what I say?
It does make sense. We do have defined responsibilities and authorities within the management system, and everyone has their key area of expertise that they may manage, individually. However, we have developed, for instance, we were talking about management review, where our management review program, we don't have a management review unless all of certain key stakeholders are there. That's kind of our commonplace to bring everybody together to kind of understand how the management system is working together as a whole. We've picked a couple key places within the system to make sure that we're always integrating those key stakeholders into the process. Like I said, we do have defined responsibilities and authorities, and we do have one key position at each of our locations that's kind of responsible for coordinating the management system and making sure that they are always engaging, each person where needed to be, and collectively when we're doing certain activities for the system.
Because I think that's good, because I think that when companies start talking about integrated management systems, I think sort of some leaders, team leaders, may feel a little bit insecure. So maybe they're no longer required, that it's all gone into one process. But actually there is, I believe there is a rule for everybody to sort of work together. And actually that working together kind of provides a resilience within a company. And again, if the whole company is working towards the same aim, and the management commitment is there, but certainly from a food safety point of view, the responsibility is not all carried by one person. It is a company responsibility. We talk a lot in food safety about food safety culture, and that culture is brought about by everybody being involved and everybody integrating and working towards a common goal. So I'm pleased to hear that all this expertise is coming together, and whereas we're not eliminating roles, we're actually bringing them together and learning from each other. So I think that's good to know. So should we go to the next slide? And I think we're coming to our end. Yes, our final thoughts. So just talking about, we have talked about benefits and efficiencies of sort of integrating that management system. So what would your key benefit that you see? Maybe Renisha, you can just, I know you've talked a lot about them, but summarize the key benefits of the integrated management system.
I think the key benefit is just, like I said, the key benefit is taking the time to really integrate your system, because when you want it to be an integrated system in practice, it's a lot of information to consume across those standards. And if you want the people who are actually performing the activities and processes to really understand and apply those concepts that you have brought into your system, you have to make sure you streamline it and combine it in a way that they don't have to focus on, am I doing this for environmental or am I doing this for that? They just understand that what they're doing is making sure that they're complying with all of the facets that they need to comply across all systems. I think Remco had mentioned it earlier. I know that it's not required as much now, but having an IMS manual for us has proven to be super beneficial. If anything, especially when you're first starting out and you're trying to get a solid foundation of your management system, having that IMS manual built so you can understand as a company how your integrated management system is working and how that associates itself with the standards, because especially when you're getting audited, the auditor wants to know how you're meeting clause 4.1 or clause 6.2. So you want to build your integrated system so that it's clear, especially the parts that you have integrated, how you're doing that. And the manual for us has proved to be a great benefit to use that as like a platform to say, this is how our integrated management system is built and complies with all of the 4 standards. So I don't know if that's quite answers the question, but as far as a benefit for us that I would like to, highlight for others is that definitely keep that in mind, that an IMS manual can help you build a strong foundation.
I think that's great, and certainly from an auditing point of view and from a certification point of view, even without the integrated, with the formal integration, certainly FSSC, provides or 22,003 provides a concession. If you've already got a management system implemented, then you can take a reduction in audit time for FSSC 22,000, even if it's without full integration, and that's because I believe that the knowledge of that management system approach is already instilled in that company. So, Remco, how does I'm just going to bring in we haven't talked about it, but obviously we're coming out of a pandemic. We've all suffered, we've all seen some changes. We've all made operational changes ourselves. I don't think anybody has been left unchanged by the pandemic. Have you found that the integrated management system approach has provided some additional resilience for Anisha through the pandemic? I think from FSSC, we have been able to weather certain changes. We do have a 3-year certification cycle, so we have been able to manage the certifications in a lot of companies where travel has been restricted. We also have learned how to become very flexible, and our risk assessment has been challenged because we're constantly sort of assessing the risk of the need to sort of visit companies to continue the certification and so on. Worker safety particularly has kind of come to the forefront too during the pandemic. So can you identify any aspects of running this type of management system approach through the pandemic? We've got 45,000 having to protect the workers both at home and at work. We've got this, focus on the supply chain, that we have to keep our suppliers in mind. Do you see that there's any key benefits that you can sort of actually bring to mind that your management system approach has helped you weather the adverse effects of the pandemic?
Right. One of the key things that come to mind, and we were kind of talking about it a little bit earlier, is the way that our context of organization is built when the pandemic arises. Because our context is built from an integrated perspective, when we added COVID-19 or the pandemic as a threat or a relevant external issue, it forced us to look at it in all 4 areas. And it really allowed us to have an overview of how does this impact food safety? How is this impacting the quality of our business? How is this impacting environmental? How does this impact worker safety? And we was able to come together as a group and use that one kind of methodology and tool stemming from the context of audit to make sure that we had assessed all the risks across all systems and had controls in place for all systems. That's one key area, especially from a management system perspective, that we found a lot of benefit from and actually implemented a lot of good controls that kind of helped us kind of as we are getting, used to being in this type of environment. Also with scheduling the audits, I think FSSC did a great job with having risk-based audits because we did have an integrated system. We were able to still have a lot of our external audits happen virtually, which was great. And then for FSSC, we were able to do, because it has to be done on site, they still implemented a lot of things in place, such as being able to have virtual risk assessments to be able to schedule our audits at a later date, because we had that integrated system and we were able to provide a lot of the information readily. We were able to overcome that issue with scheduling very easy. So I thought that process from an external perspective worked really well through the pandemic.
Oh, well, I'm pleased to hear that. And so, Remco, do you have any learnings from the pandemic that we have learned in the management system approach, or is showing how the management system approach has helped us and our certified companies through the pandemic? Any examples that you can think of?
Yeah, but more related to indeed the management system approach itself. By example, if we talk about food safety, what we all have seen is certainly in the first months is that everybody was in shock about the COVID-19. We did not know all to do, and this has indirectly and sometimes even directly an impact on supplies of raw materials. So what you really saw is that companies did not receive the raw materials because they could not be shipped from one country to the other country and all related elements together. And then you came up that is this really a food safety aspect? Yes, it is, but it's also related to your stakeholders, because that's also part of it for the environment where you are moving in and what kind of impact does it have. And for sure, this has helped organizations more to look at the context analysis, risk and opportunities, especially if you look at ISO 20000 FSSC that we just started a year ago with FSSC version 5, for which this harmonized approach was in place. So this is for sure a driver now for organizations to look more in depth to that. And in addition to that part, what I also see is management of emergency elements, management of crisis. Companies were affected by COVID-19. It could be for raw materials, it could be on food safety, but of course also for personnel working over there. So based on 45001, also that has an impact on it. If people, how can you prevent that people are affected by COVID-19? So the integrated management system for sure helped more to realize what is possible within the system itself. What we have seen in the past, and now talking about decades ago, is more to say, I need to have a system in place, but does the system really help the organization? I think now during COVID-19, for companies now, it must be able that the system should help the organization by mitigating the risk and to take the right actions to that part.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that we have learned, but I think we've all benefited from the ISO framework, the forethought of the the risk-based controls and management system. So I think that we're all we've all benefited from it. So I wonder if we have some questions for all of us. So any questions that we have?
Yes, actually, we have a few questions. So the first question that I have is, what type of resources need to be made available to have an effective integrated audit with multiple auditors?
Remco, I think that's for you.
Yeah, I think a key here is to make a good communication with the organization itself. Which people, which experts are there in place? Is it one person who knows everything, or is it a group of persons? Yeah, that has a direct impact on how the integrated audit can be there and at what kind of level. Can it be in integrated audit, or is it more an audit done together separately on the different subjects which are over there? So for me, communication is key to create the detailed audit plan and to look which people are needed at what kind of time frame during the audit, to prevent on one hand that you need to do things double, asking the same questions to the same person, by example, but the other hand also that the right people are available, that if a question is asked, we can see the proper answer and we can have the evidence which are there. So once again, communication for the detailed audit plan together with the organization is really key to see which resources are needed from company side, but also from auditor sides, of course, as well.
Great, thank you. We have a second question. This is, what is the best way to demonstrate and communicate how applicable standards have been integrated at your company/facility?
Is that through certification? I think probably Ronisha, is that one for you?
Yeah, I think I may have alluded to it a little bit earlier. I think the best way to show that is through, like I said, the IMS manual has proven to be beneficial for us. I know it's not necessarily required anymore. We had it already when it was required, so it was just easy to keep using it and integrate our ideas and our theories into it. So I think that is a very good way to show how your system is integrated, as well as your program documents. You know, when you have an integrated system, you definitely, when you build your goals and objectives program or your internal audit program, hopefully you're able to build those to where they incorporate all of the standards, and you can use those program documents as well to show where those key aspects from each standard, and thankfully they're typically the same now with the alignment, how those standard requirements have been implemented into your program documents as well.
And I would also add to that certification, the capacity of a company to achieve certification is key. And that certainly is no small thing. So achieving that certification is very major, and customers are aware of the commitment that's needed and, you know, what an achievement that is. So,
Thank you. That's wonderful. And we have time for one more question. What are the typical differences in the audit process for ISO 22000/9001 on one site and ISO 14001 and ISO 45001 on the other site?
well, I think Remco's answered a lot of that already. So
yeah, I already have explained a little bit on that part as well. So first of all, you see a lot of commonalities. That's what we already have concluded, I think, during this webinar. So you can have a lot of integration during the audit itself. But if you typically look at ISO 9001 and ISO 22000, these are really based on what I indeed have told is about the processes with the organization. So from intake of raw materials up to the final product and storage on that part, primary processes, secondary processes. If you look at ISO 14001, 45001, it's not only related to processes, but it's also giving more emphasis on topics itself, like legislation, environmental legislation, the permits a company have, and that's cross department, cross processing, for which the auditor will pick up all kinds of elements all together to see where it is covered within the organization itself. Of course, there will be processes also for these two standards, but there is some differences in focus. That's what I would like to add. And of course, within food, you also can have some topics which are crossing during the process itself. Think about allergens, by example. So it's not all black and white, but there is some differences into that.
Yeah, if I can add a little, I don't know if we're done, and I was going to say, especially that when it comes to food safety, one of the key differences, that clause 8 that we talked about, that's where you start seeing a lot of separation, even with food safety going a little bit more into your PRPs, your prerequisite programs and things like that, as far as the actual audit taking place.
And I'm just going to add to that too, because obviously FSSC 22000 adds the additional requirements as well, which are beyond ISO 22000 in order to keep FSSC 22000 aligned with GFSI. And also we have that added requirement for an unannounced audit every 3 years. So that's another difference. So certainly FSSC 22,000 does add some additional requirements, but still with that management system framework, it aligns well with all the other ISO management systems.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this discussion. I appreciate all the commentary. And I would like to thank you for attending the discussion, and a special thanks to all of our panelists here, Renisha, Jacqueline, Remco. Thank you for the commentary. We appreciate it. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar, so look for it in your inbox. And I want to thank you, and please have an enjoyable rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.